Hello, you guys. Welcome back to Maverick Mind, the podcast. As always, such a fab way to begin the week with you all. And welcome also to anyone who might be listening for the very, very first time. This week, I'm so excited to bring you this conversation. It's with a very special person by the name of N V Peacock. She is a traditionally published author. She writes thriller fiction and has been published by massive publishing houses like Harper Collins, Canelo, Penguin, and Simon Schuster in the US. She also hosts, or co-hosts, I should say, a podcast called The Red Rabbit Hole, which is a true crime meets thriller fiction type podcast. Definitely one to check out for sure. I'll leave the links to that in the show notes. Nicky, or N V Peacock, I should call her by her writer's name, really, is a real wealth of knowledge. Because she's done the impossible, we're kind of taught that becoming a traditionally published author these days is such an impossible feat. And then to become a successful one, she's published 3 books, and with many, many more short stories that were published before that. We're taught that this is such an impossible feat to become a successfully published author, but she proves that actually with some vision, some drive, and really nurturing your creativity in so many specific ways that she talks about in this podcast or in this interview, that you can really do it. You can really do anything, and you can really kind of create that life for yourself. And I think that the way she speaks is so natural and so inspiring. I really think that it will help so many of you, whether you're writers or whether you're not. We talk about, overcoming perfectionism, which is something that a lot of us struggle with as creatives of all kinds. Myself, I've definitely danced with that myself for sure. I don't really consider myself much of a perfectionist anymore. I'm more of a good enoughist, but that took some work, and we go into that in this podcast. We also talk about the journey to becoming a traditionally published author, the journey to actually, after that, creating success from that book. And again, these are all things that we can transfer into your music, into your art, into your paintings, into your designs, into your creative business. There's so many channels that you can take this advice. So I cannot wait for you to hear this one. N V Peacock, a massive warm welcome to Maverick Mind, the podcast. Okay, N V Peacock, massive warm welcome to Maverick Mind. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hi, Ellie. Hi, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. I'm excited to have this conversation, and excited to hear a little bit about your story of many twists and turns it's taken, I'm sure, to be a published author many, many times over. I like to kind of paint the picture to begin with of, oh, excuse the pun when we're talking about artists. I didn't do that on purpose, people. I'm not that cheesy.
Yes, you did.
If you go back to kind of maybe your childhood, was writing something that you always did, or was it more you were inspired by reading, or was it something that you found later in life, do you think?
I think it was a combination of the two. I wrote a lot when I was little. I have quite a dark mind, as I think most readers will gather very quickly when they start reading my stuff. And it kind of stems from when I was in junior school, and there was like a competition to see who could write the best autumnal story. So I decided to write one about a killer scarecrow. Bearing in mind I'm only like 8 years old. And the principal had my mum in, thinking that obviously something's very wrong at home with this girl. And she went off on them, saying, my daughter is fine. My daughter just has an imagination, and you shouldn't, have a go at her for that, and blah, blah, blah. So it was great. So I think my mum was a big influence on me. She always wanted to be a writer herself. And as with a lot of creative individuals, life kind of gets in the way, and the kind of boring parts of life takes over. And she never really got to get published or anything like that. But with mine, I got to the point where I was writing a bit, but then I had this massive reading frenzy, which I think helped a lot. I think that if you can read a lot of, from a writing point of view, if you can read a lot of work, you can almost learn how to tell a good story through osmosis. Because if you read it a lot, your subconscious kind of gets the idea before your conscious mind does, as how a good story is constructed. And I think I did that for about 4 or 5 years, like solid, of like absolute. Every time you'd see me, I had a book in my hand. And then it was about, blimey, about 2011 that I decided I was going to take my writing more seriously. I was going to try out for things and do stuff because part of it is submitting and with others like auditioning, I guess, and doing those things, putting yourself out there. And it can be heart-wrenching to do that because there is rejection and you never think you're good enough or that it's just a pipe dream. And, and you've got people in your life that will tell you, yeah, go for it. But then you've also got people in your life that will go, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. And
Yeah.
it's listening to the right voices and especially the right voices in your head. So I I'd been in sales and marketing for about 10 years by then. So I used what I knew from sales and marketing to market myself and to find opportunities to do. And that's when I discovered the anthology market especially in the US, but it's all around the world. And they were specifically doing call outs for like different genres and like little challenges. So things like write a vampire story that no one's ever heard before, or, take a new stance on a zombie story or something. And I love a challenge. So I was on it. And that's how I ended up sort of starting my career. So I had about 30 short stories published in anthologies all over the world with all different
Wow.
publishers. And then I wrote some YA and then I kind of got onto the books.
Wow. And I'm really keen to know, like, from writing that story about the scarecrow when you were that young, where do you think that came from? Was it you were always interested in the more thriller side of things, or maybe the scarier side of things? Were you watching TV, like stuff on TV that was a similar theme, or was it just you just came out of nowhere? Do you think?
I think it was, I mean, my brother's the same as me. I think it was our upbringing. Nothing was kind of forbidden to us, if you know what I mean. My parents were
Mm.
very much, we'd rather they did something in front of us than away from us. So like when it came to alcohol, they gave us alcohol from when we were like 13, 14 years old, just to try
Mm.
things and, sort of see how we got on with stuff. And so nothing was forbidden. And so nothing was indulged in, so to speak, from that
Mm.
way. Like I don't drink at all now because I just don't see the point. But when it came to sort of writing and my imagination, it was always fueled by that kind of by the supernatural and the paranormal and talking to people about things like that. And the darker side has just always attracted me. And I don't know whether, again, nature, nurture, I think it's probably a combination of the two. That's just what I was born with. But my mum and dad were very free and easy with letting us watch horror films. And, you watch it, but if you have nightmares, that's so it was always our
Yeah.
responsibility as to what we were doing. So nothing was ever sort of taken away from us or shielded from us from that kind of point of view.
That's really interesting because it kind of widens your lens of uh, sources that you can be inspired by or learn from. It also kind of gets rid of something that I think a lot of us struggle with, and that is like having shame around certain things. We can get shame around like, things that we want to create, or shame around the way that we want to express ourselves sometimes from loads of different reasons, from like societal ideas of what's right and wrong, from sometimes the way we've been brought up, sometimes certain religions, not to bash religion, but sometimes it can cause kind of this kind of set of rules, or this way to live or this way to express yourself is acceptable, and the thing outside of that is not really. So you should probably not do that. You should squeeze yourself into this box that's more palatable to other people. So it's really interesting that you kind of grew up in a way. I think I grew up in a similar way,
Mm,
where kind of anything goes to a degree, but you kind of, if you want to expose yourself to something, okay, but you have to take responsibility for yourself
mm.
after that. And it kind of gives you authority and power over yourself too, which I think is a really vital thing to have in life in general. But then if you're going to pursue a path where you're doing stuff on your own, to have that kind of self responsibility, I think it's a really, really powerful thing to have. So that's
Well, the
awesome.
very essence of creativity is to explore and to be yourself and to, create new things. And you can't create new things if you're not exposed to the old things and you're not
Mm.
understanding what you like. Because I think that creative people, if they're doing something that doesn't intrigue them in any way, it's not really creative. It's like having to write to order. So I've done some ghostwriting in the past for people, and I wouldn't take on projects that I couldn't be passionate about, even though it's not my
Yeah.
name attached to it. I couldn't be passionate about it. So therefore I was thinking, then that makes my love of writing a job. And as much
Mm.
as I need to keep the wolf from the door and I need to earn money and, everything that everybody else has, I still have to I have to be passionate about writing, and I have to be passionate about my creativity and what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally the same. If I don't, I think a lot of us are really similar, that you have to be passionate about what you're doing. Otherwise, I can be like full body exploding with ideas, or the most unbothered person in the room. If I'm trying to do something that doesn't really inspire me or doesn't really light me up in some way, even if it's one of those things that you have to do just to get a bit of money from somewhere, I have to be passionate about it. Otherwise, as I say, there's just like the most unbothered that I can ever be. But I think then when you're kind of going after your own path and maybe choosing to kind of back yourself and choosing to back your talent and create a path where you're eventually just making things that you love all the time, we still come up with moments maybe where we're not so passionate about the thing that we are really passionate about. Maybe like there's sometimes some days you don't feel the most creative, or sometimes you're kind of trying to write something or trying to create something that you were excited about, and then you kind of lose the passion for it. Is that something that happens to you during your kind of writing process ever, or is it some at that point do you kind of bid it, or do you kind of sit with it more?
Well, when it comes to writing, you've got two effective processes to get a book, to be able to sell. You've got the creative part, which is what I call monkey minding, where you're loving it and you're writing everything and you're doing your plan and you're God in this world and you can create whatever you like and you're getting the story and the characters out. But then about 70% of that project is actually editing.
Mm.
And it's honing down and working with someone else. Unfortunately, if you're in the publishing industry, you've got an agent and an editor that you have to work with, so you've got to appease two people at the same time, so it's not always just your vision, and that could be hard for creative people to take one hand off the steering wheel and give it to someone else sometimes.
Yeah.
And that, I find, the editing side, the more kind of I guess the practical side of writing, I can procrastinate quite a bit on, but I've learned a lot. I'm very curious as a person. And if something like happens to me or I start feeling something, I'm very interested in psychology and how the mind works. Especially when I was in sales and marketing, it was very much, knowing your audience and knowing how like the tips and tricks of selling something. And so I've always been like NLP techniques. I've always been really interested in that. And when I looked into procrastination, for example, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. But the main thing for procrastination is the fear of failure.
Mm.
So you don't, because if you don't complete something, you always have the hope that it will be great. But if you complete it, it's done and you'll know.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you design that dress and it's beautiful in your head, but as you get to the end, you start doubting yourself and thinking, but what if nobody wants to wear it? What if I've done all this work? And it starts to really eat away at your motivation. But the
Mm.
quickest way I found to get past that is also to realize, well, this is what it is. And to be honest, if I don't get that book out there, then I'll never know for sure. And I'd much rather know for sure whether it was a hit or a miss. But
Mm.
also, in terms of, like making yourself do things, I'm really big on writing to-do lists. And I'd much rather, like, for example, write than wash my car. So I'll always put wash my
Mm.
car at the top of my to-do list. And so rather than wash my car, I'll do that writing. And it's a great way of just making yourself do something. So you got to think of a massive job you don't want to do and put it next to the job you know you should be doing.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think there's another thing that kind of um I read somewhere, I wish I could remember where to be able to kind of quote this person. But I can't remember, unfortunately. Around procrastination, and it's procrastination is often trying to control how others are going to perceive something that you're trying to put out into the world.
Mm,
So it's kind of like holding yourself in stagnation, because in your mind you're trying to kind of control, well, if it's not how I want it, if it's not if the vision doesn't match like the reality, then I can't control how other people are going to see it, because in my mind I can see people loving this, but
mhm.
when it's in the real life I don't have any control over that. So I think to kind of combat those things, that's also kind of a root within perfectionism as well, which a lot of us know very well. And so I think to kind of combat both those things is getting to this mindset that once you've finished something, it's not yours anymore.
Yeah, you've birthed it into the world.
Yeah. Like when you finish a book, it goes into the hands of someone else and they will read the words, but in their mind, what they're visualizing might not be exactly what you're visualizing. But does it matter? I don't think it does. I think that's especially with books and stories, that's kind of the power of it. It's kind of unlocking our imagination through visualizing a story as you read it.
I mean, perfectionism is an interesting subject as well. I mean, it's very much to quote someone, it was actually Colonel Custer that said this, although you perhaps shouldn't listen to him normally. But he did have a really good quote about perfectionism. He said, "A terrible plan violently executed today is better than a perfect one always going
Mm,
to be executed tomorrow." So it's
that's
better to
very
do
true.
something today, regardless of how well it's been planned, than to just keep procrastinating until the next day, and nothing ever gets done. So again, don't
Yeah.
listen to Colonel Custer for anything else but procrastination advice.
But for sure, yeah, I love that. If you think back to kind of when you were starting to, as you said, starting to take your writing a bit more seriously, can you remember any kind of any moments where you felt really held back or like you were afraid to do that? And can you remember kind of how that felt?
Yeah, I think one of the things with being a writer, and probably for all creative people, unless they're very lucky, you do end up doing quite a lot of stuff on your own. And
Yeah.
I was looking around for a writers group near me. I live in Northamptonshire, and I was looking. It's not a massive town, but it's not a small town. It's all right. It's a kind of mid-sized
Mm.
town, so you'd think there'd be a writers group, and there really wasn't. The only one that met was like for retired people in the day, which when you work, you can't attend.
Mm.
And I didn't really want to subject those retired people to my horrors of my brain. So I was just like, I can't, there's no one to share my work with. There's no one to get feedback or work. And I felt really frustrated that I didn't have that. But rather than just kind of piss and whinge about it, I created my own group. And now it's got, we're 14 years on now and there's 35 members of it. We got so big we
Wow.
had to meet in a community centre.
I love that. And again, I was actually just speaking to someone else in a different interview about something very similar that we can, I think, often play the victim.
Mm.
Like, oh, well, there's no one around me doing the same thing. So I'm just going to keep suffering in silence on my own. Instead of actually kind of taking your power into your own hands and saying, okay, well, I want to be around other people doing similar things because otherwise I feel lonely AF. Um, so I'm just going to create it. It's another way of using your creative energy, right? It's just like, well, I'm just going to, there's a problem. I'm going to find a solution. I'm going to create it for myself. And that in turn kind of brings you closer to the goal of getting your work out into the world, I guess, because it kind of gives you people that are of the same mind in a space where people maybe are not so much like that.
Yeah, it was very much, I mean, it's literally the best thing I've ever done because I'd say 90% of my best friends come from that group.
Wow.
And, because as creative people, our minds work the same way.
Mm,
You meet up with someone who's like an accountant or someone who's perhaps, like very good at numbers and science and figures, and their brains work very differently. So you can talk to them and you could maybe get on with them, but you're not going to be able to go, guess what I just read about this true crime or this and the other, and
yeah.
really get into something because their brain's not going to work the same. Or I just saw this amazing performance piece. You're not going to
Mm,
be able to connect on the different levels. And the group not only and the group has produced other published writers now.
mm,
So I got published and I kind of passed my knowledge on to them. And, it created accountability too, which is a
yeah.
huge thing with creative people because, we can say until the cows come home, we're going to do this, we're going to be big and we're going to be stars and bestsellers and blah, blah, blah. But if there's no one there holding you accountable to say, well, what are you doing?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
you sat watching Netflix, Nick, get off your bum and get back on the laptop.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also writing a book can take a long, long time. So there's a lot of a lot of space in there for procrastination, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So to have people just kind of lovingly kick you up the bum and say, "Hey, wait a minute, have you finished that book yet?"
Yeah,
Or
you haven't put
what's
anything
happening
to
with
the
that?
group. Yeah, in
Yeah.
ages. What are you doing?
Yeah, I've definitely found the same through different channels, through, coaching programs that I've been part of, or as you say, creative friends that might be doing something slightly different, but they're still there to be like, oh, so what are you working on now? And you're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be doing that thing. I'd love to hear a bit more about the process that it took for you to get published, I mean, the traditional way. Because I've had people on this podcast, a few different people that are self-published. I've also had a publisher of self-publishing, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
That kind of helps people with the self-publishing process. So to go the traditional route, I'd love to hear your story through that, because I know it can be challenging for sure.
Mine was a bit of an odd one. So I love true crime podcasts, as I've said, and I actually have one now. I've got the Red Rabbit Hole, which is where true crime meets thriller fiction, with my co-host Lisa Shepherd. And but beforehand, I just loved listening to them. I love true crime anyway, because I mean, truth is stranger than fiction most of the time.
Mm,
And I get obsessed with things like serial killers and just learning again how the mind works. How do they do what they
mm,
do? How do they get away with it? How do they sleep at night? These
mm,
are the questions that go round and round in my head that need answering. And I'd been listening to some podcasts, and there was a kind of a local thing that happened. And between those two things, I started thinking up the story for Little Bones. That's my the first one.
mm,
And Little Bones kind of it got in my head and wouldn't get out. And at the time, it was probably the worst time to start writing a book because I was working full time. I was still doing the anthologies and the youth adult novellas. And I decided because I had the money, I come from a very working class background and I hadn't had a chance to go to university to get a degree. And because I'd suddenly got this massive commission bonus, I thought I'm gonna go to Open University and I'm gonna get my degree. So I'd started a creative writing degree, which I now have, by the way. I did complete it. This didn't put me off. Um,
mm.
it should have, but it didn't. So I decided I'm going to write this book. And the book was all about a true crime podcast that reveals the identity of a serial killer's daughter living in this small town like the one that I live in. And it kind of insinuates that she's part of a crime that's happening there and then. And things go wrong from that point of view. And I'd written it and then I'd sent it away because I saw again through like submitting to anthologies and things like that. I'd got into the habit of submitting, which I think is part of it too, just to get into the habit of putting yourself out there. And I'd seen a call out from Avon, which is uh, it's part of Harper Collins. It's one of their imprints. And Harper Collins is one of the big publishers. You can't really get to them without an agent. And I hadn't got an agent. But then I saw the call out and I was like, oh, you don't need an agent for this. So I just put it in. And then COVID happened.
Wow.
And I was like, right, need to get, and my head turned into, right, need to sort out my job, need to make sure everything's okay, need to make sure my family's okay. And I forgot all about it. And months into COVID, I was getting a London number come up on my phone. And I'm looking at it thinking, oh, it's a scam. I'm not answering
Mm.
that. It's one of these, oh, you've been in an accident jobs.
Yeah.
So ignore, ignore, ignore. I actually blocked it, I think, at one point. And then I got an email from HarperCollins saying, we want to publish your book. Can you please answer your phone? So I'd completely ruined that moment that all the authors talk about of the call from the publisher that they want, that you go, way, and then this, and I didn't
Yeah.
get it because I didn't answer the phone.
Well, it's lucky that they emailed as well,
Yeah, they
just
were
to,
keen.
yeah, they're
I
very
suppose they
keen
really
because they
wanted
could
it.
very easily just go on to the next, but they
Yeah.
were clearly very keen to publish that one.
Yeah.
That's amazing because also for a lot of people, especially when they're thinking of writing a book or so many different channels of creativity, we think we're going to have to be knocking down 100 doors and we're going to get 100 no's and get really used to rejection. And then sometimes it's just that the right story or the right person at the right time and it kind of just happens maybe
Yeah.
when you
Sometimes
had.
it happens quick and sometimes it happens after a long time. I mean, I it's not like I've never been rejected either. I've been
Yeah, yeah, of
rejected for
course.
short stories, and I mean, I did try to get an agent originally for Little Bones and I didn't even get a single one come back to me to say no, let alone anything else. So it
Mm,
wasn't, I get frustrated when I hear authors say, "Oh, I'm an overnight success," and I think, yeah, because you've been working at it for 10 years. That's
Yeah,
why
exactly.
know,
Or you've been
there
probably
is
been
no such thing.
yeah, you've probably been writing little bits of stuff since you were very, very small. Nothing is ever an overnight success, I don't think. It's always
No.
like we're exercising the muscle of our talent or our skills or anything over time. And then you might be exercising the muscle of rejection sometimes and still kind of mustering the power to believe in yourself. But I guess something I really think is quite powerful is that story, even if you tried to get an agent before and no agent came back to you, you still had it in you to go like, no, I still believe in this story. It's still within me. It really needs to kind of come out, and that I'm gonna trust in it this one more time and put it out into this big wide space of Harper Collins. I love that. And I think, what do you think it was that kind of kept you in believing in that story?
Again, I think it's part of my sales training. It's a numbers game. And sales training is, no, every no brings you closer to the yes. That's what we say in
Yeah.
sales. So, if you said no to me today, because if I asked you, oh, would you like this book? And you said no, that's fine. The next person I'm going to ask, would you like this book? And they'll go, yes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if someone says no, someone's going to say yes. So that was my kind of view of it. So I'd sent out to agents, got zero response. Like I said, not even rejections. They didn't even bother to acknowledge that I'd sent something to them. And then HarperCollins, one of the biggest publishers in the world, wanted it.
Mm.
So it just goes to show you as well that some agents don't really, if you send something, it doesn't mean to say that it's a lost cause.
Yeah, exactly. I think often like it's a taste thing, and in a loads of different channels where we need to have some kind of gatekeeper for the thing that we want. So, like, if you're an actor, you need an agent for your auditions, or a book, you need an agent for publishing, or many other different things. You might need an art collective for your art or whatever. Um, it's important, I think, to remember that they are actually the middleman between you and the person that you really actually want to speak to. And sometimes they'll know what they're talking about, and sometimes they will be right, but not always, you know?
No, and they are just people.
Yeah.
All these agents, and I mean, I have one now. I have an agent now. I did everything around the wrong way. I got the book deal and then I got the agent. And my agent is lovely and she's so sweet and she always gets back. There's a lot of authors out there that don't get on with their agents, but mine always gets back to me. She always does a great job, and she always is my biggest cheerleader on everything, which is what you need from an agent.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of it is to do with just timing. And you can't fake timing, you can't buy timing. You've just got to keep plugging until you get the right timing. So you need like you said, the right person at the right time, in the right mood, wanting the thing that you're selling and
Mm.
actually enjoying your work. I mean, talent is a part of it, but it's not the biggest part because people think, well, if I'm
No.
not a talented writer, I'm not gonna. Well, talent is actually subjective, just as most art is.
Mm.
And as long as you've done the best work, e.g., it can be comprehended. It's under, it's written in the right language and in the right way,
Mm.
and is something that is a genre that people are actually looking for. So knowing your market, then you've got a good chance of getting in front of that right person at the right time, in the right mood, looking for the right work.
Yeah, for sure. There's kind of like two layers to that. I think that maybe having a sales and marketing background would help you kind of get that perspective, because I think a lot of creatives who don't have that avoid those two things like the plague.
Mm.
Sales and marketing give us the biggest ick ever until you reframe your mindset around them. And sometimes it takes work to do that, but I guess you had that kind of beforehand. So again, it's kind of the other way around. But do you think that there was something different from like selling in work before to then trying to sell yourself? Did you have a different perspective around that, or did you just apply the same kind of methods?
It usually is about the same type of methods. I mean, I sold advertising space, which is basically selling a dream, Ellie. You're not selling anything physical. And the problem with advertising space is the person then has to choose what to go in it. And so your success as e.g. of your product is reliant on someone else's input, which
Mm.
very rarely works. So when it comes to sort of selling yourself, I think you have to believe in what you do, but you also have to take a big pill on the ego. Because I do find, and I haven't met a lot of artists. Well, I've got some artist friends, but I tend to work more with writers than anyone else. But I do find with a lot of novice writers, they have massive egos. Whereas the ones that have been published, have gone through the mill, actually have quite small egos because it's been not battered out of them, but they've realized that it doesn't help them.
Yeah,
I
for
spoke
sure.
to, yeah, I spoke to this writer was looking to join the group, and I usually do a one-on-one with new group members, so they get an idea, they get a good feel of the group, they know how it works, and I'm very strict with the group in terms of nobody can criticize someone's work without giving a reason why they don't like it and a solution to fix it, which then stops people from being like really attacky for
Mm.
no reason, which can happen. And I spoke to this writer, and she was absolutely convinced that her 120,000 word thriller was going to be a success. And I knew instantly that it's only 90,000 words that thrillers should be. So
Yeah.
she was like way over. There isn't
Yeah.
an agent or a publisher in the world or a reader that's going to look at that book and is going to go, oh, yeah, that's going to be a hit because it's too long. So she's obviously wound around. She didn't know how to tell a story. She didn't know the beats of a story. She had no knowledge behind her. And the things that she was telling me, she was like doing all the wrong things. And I'm trying to explain to her, well, no, it's still an industry and it's still a business. So you can't just say, well, my 120,000 word, fantasy book style thriller is
Mm.
gonna, bust all sales records. Why? No other one
Yeah.
has. And, it's not done in the industry. It's like saying, well, I'm going to be a doctor, but I ain't going to university to do that. I'm just going to learn it off YouTube.
Yeah, God.
Pass me that scalpel.
Yeah. I think that does go for a lot of different creative channels or paths. I think that there's something to be said on many different ways, from being an artist to being an actor to being a designer to anything else. But there's a fine line, there's a balance between believing in yourself and what you're creating, and also, what's the word? Being
The Delulu.
sympathetic. They're being a
Yeah.
little, yeah, being there's a good amount of Delulu, and then there's a bit too far. I think you have to be a little bit delusional to do these things. You have to be a little bit delusional to believe that you're gonna get published because it's hard, or a little bit delusional to believe that you're gonna be a full-time artist because the world tells us that that's impossible when actually it's not. Um, but you also kind of have to somewhat play the game a little bit. You have to put your ego aside, like some of it to one side, and kind of play the game. Sometimes you have to play the game for a while to then be able to create the thing that you really want to create in the end. Maybe just to fuel this creative life, because we kind of have to keep moving forwards in some way, I think.
Mm. And it can be really hard within, I mean, just using the publishing industry as an example. So I have writers that will say to me, well, I want to write that amount of words because Stephen King writes that amount of words and he's published and he's really successful. And it's like trying to explain to them you're putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Stephen King can do whatever he likes. He could write a recipe book and people will buy it. Yeah, a
Yeah.
recipe book that makes no sense, that's for cannibalism or something, who knows? And it will still sell. And they will still get published because of who he is. Whereas when he first started writing, if you read some of his earlier work, you'll see more of the kind of structure. You can't break the rules until you abide by the rules and you
Mm.
know the rules. And then you become famous and successful, and then you can pretty much do whatever you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was so many kind of really impactful creators of all kinds have had a very similar way of doing things, of learning the rules before you can break them. I mean, from a fashion space, I was always completely obsessed with Alexander McQueen. Like, I wanted to be him. Like, if I wasn't going to be him, I wasn't going to be happy. And he started from a tailoring background, and tailoring is so intricate and so by the book and very kind of mathematical, and all these techniques have been going on for years and years and years. But to learn these really classical ways of creating very classical clothes to be able to break all those rules and really
Mm.
innovate. I think that's something that we all kind of have to learn how to do. It's kind of like, when you're doing a driving test and you have to do all of the things that the driving instructor tells you to do. You have to do everything exactly by the book. But then when you are on the road and you've passed already, no one actually really drives like that.
No, no one used the handbrake. We all used the bite. It's
Yeah,
just
no one really does the like proper 3-point turn. It's more like a 50s.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
what sort of aesthetic, Ellie, do you work on now? I mean, what's your kind of, if it was Alexander McQueen before, have you evolved, or are you kind of still?
Well, now it's kind of loads of different things. I mean,
Mm,
it was very McQueen, and then I kind of went a very like Antwerpy designer, like Rick Owens kind of influences, which was like very baggy black. And then I kind of went somewhere else, and then it took a loads of different forms to the point where I was a bit of a chameleon for a while.
mm,
And then I actually trained as a yoga teacher, and I started creating yoga clothing, like active wear kind of thing. So it's a different kind of vibe. And at the moment, I'm not designing so much, but it's always evolving and changing. I think that's a cool thing. But I think the foundation of knowing the rules
mm,
and then being able to kind of slowly start to form your own rules out of that, I think is a really powerful journey for any creative to take. I think, painters will know the way you're supposed to paint and then start using different tools.
mm,
Why does it have to be a paintbrush? Why can't it be a knife? Why can't it be this? Why can't it be that? And get a completely new innovative texture or new innovative image. But it comes from the knowledge of how to do it in the first place, I think. And that, as you say, I think sometimes when you have a big idea, or maybe you convince yourself that this is going to be your path, I think sometimes it can be an ego death a bit to kind of then go, oh, well, but actually I have to play the game a little bit and then earn my stripes a little bit, and then I'll get to do what I want to do. I think there's kind of a balance. It's like we can take on this, like, for example, when I left university, left fashion school, my teacher, especially in the third year, he had really kind of tried to shape us and harden our shells for the industry. And he did that in a really not not productive way. I don't think it did. It actually kind
mm,
of killed a lot of people's confidence, or just made them not want to do fashion at all. Um, but I think that kind of going through that and kind of shaping people into what you think that they need uh, is not that helpful in one way, but in another way, it kind of was a little bit helpful because it kind of taught us how the kind of industry that we didn't want to be part of. So
mm,
then it kind of created a crop of designers, the ones that are still designing anyway, that won't really put up with that, and then start to shape the industry in a different way. So there's a lot of layers to it, and I think that on a creative journey, we encounter so many different other people's opinions, and so many shoulds and should nots, and it's a real balance always to kind of follow some things and then question other things, like, well, why does it have to be that way?
mm,
Who says, that X amount of businesses have to fail within the first year? Or who says that only artists only ever make it after they die? Like, who says? Or like, who says that it's impossible to be a published author when it's not? Like, you've done it.
mm. Allegedly.
Literally.
I know I did it.
You did it. So
And
after
part of
you,
it, I was going to say, part of it is keeping going. I mean, time is, they always say time's a great healer, but time's a great teacher. And you
mm,
learn through time. I mean, I can look back from sort of today to even last year and say how much I've learned in that time period, as to not just how I react to things and what I need to be able to keep going, but also in terms of the industry and my techniques and how I write, which I can
yeah,
imagine is the same in every creative industry. Everything from actors and any kind of creative sculptors, all of them, they're all going to have changed, because you look back over the first things you did. You probably look back over the first designs you had and were like, "Ooh." Because
Yeah.
I do it with the
Some
books.
it's kind I kind of have both. Like some of them I'm like, oh God, what is that? And some of them at the time I thought they were awful. Like, you know, when you sit with something that you're creating too long and then by the end you absolutely hate it.
Yeah,
I had that a lot. And then now I look back at them and I'm like, oh, actually that was pretty good. At the
I
time I
have
hated
that.
it. But actually now I'm like, oh, she's okay. That girl that did that.
That it's when you, I call it prodding fatigue, is when you
Yeah.
keep working on something and working on something. And the more you work at some point, it gets to the point where it's going to be as good as it'll ever get. But if you
Yeah.
keep prodding it, it starts to go down in quality
Yeah.
because throwing everything into it and it's just not working. And I've seen other writers do it as well. And it's just looking at it with a fresh set of eyes and paring it back, isn't it, as to what it should be rather than what you kind of hoped would work.
Yeah, for sure. I see a lot of specifically writers. Yeah, I'd say writers, also musicians, if they're kind of creating a second album, they can kind of get into a bit of that with the second, because like they've got
Mm.
the first one out there and they did the scary thing and they've done that, but now the second one's got to live up to that. And they can kind of procrastinate or kind of prod that second iteration a lot. Did you find that with your like next book?
Oh, well, my next one was The Brother. And but to be honest, I did again everything around the wrong way. So my third book is 13th Girl. I actually wrote that first. So that was officially
Oh,
the book that I wrote after Little Bones, but it was that one that was published next. So
okay.
effectively I'd written two books and then it was like which one was coming out when. But it was a very I mean we spoke very briefly about imposter syndrome before, and I
Mm,
think that's where imposter syndrome really does kick in because I'd come off the back of so Little Bones came out in COVID, which meant that I didn't have all the author things that you kind of dream of. So I didn't have like a book tour, I didn't have any signings, I had no events. Every event I had was like a panel that was online like this.
mm.
So, and I didn't leave the house and I couldn't go to a bookshop and see it on a shelf. The closest I had was I saw it on a Tesco shelf. That was it.
Wow, that's pretty
And
cool though.
it's cool, yeah, but not really the same.
Yeah, it's not Waterstones, but
No. So it was a bit of a kind of I haven't really earned this, and I felt, like you said, I hadn't really earned my stripes because I didn't really do anything with the first one. And although it did really well, and I had a lot of great feedback, and it was lovely because during COVID there was a lot of people that were messaging me saying that they'd read the book and they couldn't put it down. So for 3 days they felt like they'd gotten away from COVID. And so
oh, that's good.
it was almost like a holiday for the brain, I guess, that although it was kind of dark and not the most inspiring story, I guess, from that point of view, but because they were so engrossed in it, they just stayed there and they felt like they'd had a little bit of a break from everyday gross dark life that
Mm,
COVID turned us all into. So when the second book came along and COVID was done and I could actually do things, it was very different. And I did kept thinking to myself, I can't handle this. Even with my background and it's like I can't do that. I can't do this. I don't want to go to festivals but fortunately I could do speaking engagements, I could do interviews and all those kind of things fine. I love talking to people. I love doing things like this. But
mm.
actually doing physical events and stuff like that, because I hadn't had that part of it, took
Yeah,
me a long time to kind of get down and to realize there's actually not that much difference.
not really. Was there anything that kind of gave you, I suppose, the as a dance between desire and courage to want to do in-person events? Was it just I've got to do this to get my book out there, or was it did you kind of reframe your mindset around that?
It was more, I kind of felt obligated to the people. Again, it's accountability. I felt more obligated to the people around me. So, like, especially the writers group was saying, "Oh, you're doing this then," and I was like, "Well, they really want me to do that then, so yes, I'm going to do that." Or, and it was just very. I've got one particular friend, Karen, who she's a musician as well, but she's an amazing writer and she's part of the group. And she really pushes me on because she's very much social media heavy and she's lovely. And she's like, you haven't done this. Why haven't you done that? You should do this. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's all good points. I will do that then. So having that little, I suppose, a kind of Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder going, you should
Yeah.
do this. You should do this. Why aren't you doing this? People would kill to do what you've got the opportunity to do. Will actually, spur you on a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like especially for writing books, because you hear so many stories of like however many books get published in a year and then how many really get sold. Is there something that you found really that's helped you kind of have longevity within your writing or really make a living from it? For anyone listening, maybe that's on a similar path, that's worried that it will be too hard to actually get into the hands of people. Was there something that kind of helped you with that?
It's so every book that comes out is a spin of the wheel. It's like a lottery ticket, really. So you get it out, it becomes the bestseller. You don't know. Nobody knows what's going to make a bestseller unless there's a celebrity name attached to it.
Mm.
But you don't know whether your book is going to do anything. But if it gets out, it becomes, someone on TikTok grabs onto it or some influencer starts touting about it. And next thing you know, you're a bestseller everywhere. Great. But you'll probably never have that level again, even as a bestseller. Stephen King will have sold his bestseller amount and probably will never have reached that. I mean, he'll have reached heights, but he'll never reach that again. None of us do.
Mm.
So you'll have that bestseller, but then you'll have books that don't do hardly anything.
Mm.
And it's knowing that. It's saying, if you don't buy a ticket, you're not going to win the lottery. It's just that simple. I mean, your odds to win the lottery are astronomical, but if you don't buy a ticket, they are zero. So if you
Mm.
don't produce books, if you don't produce work, if you don't go to auditions, if you don't, sew those clothes and market yourself and get yourself out there, you'll get nothing. That's the only guarantee in life. You do nothing, you get nothing. And that's the advice that I would give, is to keep writing. And the big thing I learned from my agent, which was, it's obvious when you think about it, but to actually mingle your genres. So
Mm.
if you produce thrillers, so if I'm producing thrillers, I can ideally only produce like 2 thrillers at the most in a year. Whereas if I produce a second genre, so for example, I'm also writing now a cozy crime and a youth adult novel again, then they can come out the same year. So it's more money and more chance to hit the big time.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's also kind of what we were saying earlier, of playing the game a little bit and able
Hmm.
to kind of give you the life that you really want. So to kind of fuel the part that you're really passionate about, say writing thrillers, or maybe it's writing jazz music. Sometimes you kind of have to do something that you're not as passionate about, or maybe you still have passion for, but you're not as completely lit up about, to really kind of chivvy the bit that you are passionate about forwards sometimes.
Yeah, if you're a jazz musician and that, you want to write that jazz symphony or whatever you're doing, maybe every now and again you got to write a commercial jingle. It's still writing
Yeah.
music, but it's keeping the wolf from the door. It's making enough money and it's still within the area. And you never know, that jingle might start a hook that starts another song that then becomes the big, breakout for you.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, things that maybe I think that's actually part of the creative process. That
Mm,
really, real innovation sometimes comes from stepping out of the thing that you are known for, or the thing that you're really passionate about. For example, sometimes um, within fashion design, I'm going to say within fashion design, we get influences from everything except other fashion designers, or except fashion usually. So I get influenced by architecture or artists or the color of autumn or everything around me apart from other clothing usually.
mm,
Or it was from doing something else, like doing a dance class or doing a life drawing class or something, and seeing how the model was standing, and maybe that could be like depicted in a piece of clothing in some way. It was sometimes stepping out of the thing that you do all the time can really expand your creative vision so much more. And sometimes that is something that you're getting paid to do, like writing a jingle, or sometimes it's just giving yourself space to do a class and something else. um,
mm.
do you find that those
It's
kind of things help you?
Yeah, I am. I play with watercolors every now and again. I'm not a massive artist and I can't draw for shit, but I can play, and I just find it quite therapeutic. And I think that's part of it as well, is finding an outlet for a better word, the darkness or part of whatever personality is telling you, no, you can't do this, or you shouldn't do this, or you're not of the right class, you're not of the right gender, you're not the right religion, you're not the right this to be able to do that. And
Mm.
that can really help, to kind of settle that voice down, because you can't get rid of that voice, unfortunately. I don't think anybody can, and the people that say they did are lying. We all have that inner critic, but it's just turning that inner critic to become quieter, like turning the volume down just a little bit, just so we can actually achieve our dreams and we can step forward. Because even if it's tiny steps forward, even if it's, you are that jazz musician and you're just working on your magnum opus, on your spare time, you're still doing it, or if you decide, I'm going to write a jazz musical or something,
Yeah.
and you create something and then it gets picked up and the next thing you know, you've done it. So it's you can go at things from the kind of the side rather than the front door.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think that's so often that happens within any creative path. And so many people that I know that have gotten really successful have had to turn left in order to turn right. And so
Hmm.
it's never going to be this like linear trajectory that sometimes the vision in our mind tells us it's going to be. Sometimes you do have to meander, and sometimes that actually kind of through turning left, you find something that you wouldn't have otherwise found, something within yourself or some inspiration or some other layer of your creative energy that you wouldn't have found otherwise. I think, for example, like you spending many years in sales and marketing gave you a lot of tools that now you can use for to do the thing that you're really passionate about, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, and I still love it. You can have more than one love, and I think that's part
Mm.
of the kind of, I suppose, what we're taught you can only have one love. That's it. You can't have any more passions, and they don't intersect. So choose wisely. Like, you don't actually have to choose at all. I love sales and marketing. It's still something that I love doing, and I love writing. And it just so happens for me those two things can intersect and can work really well. Although in saying that, when you go traditional publishing, a lot of your stuff is through your publisher. You're not in
Yeah.
charge of what you do. It's only when you're self-published you can really kind of dig in and do those kind of the exciting things that you choose to do.
Yeah, that's true. There's kind of pros and cons to both, I suppose. That nowadays the self-publishing thing is really coming up and on a rise. And I guess it's kind of like that analogy of when you work for a big business, it's like trying to turn a cruise ship, whereas when you work for a small business, it's like being in a speedboat. And I think like it's a similar thing. Maybe sometimes going the traditional way of doing stuff is like that cruise ship, and it takes a long time to turn and innovate and do different things. Whereas when you're in the speedboat, you can go a lot faster, but sometimes it's yeah,
But you can also
a bumpier
crash.
ride
Yeah,
sometimes.
you could crash into a dolphin.
You never know, you could do. Cool. Well, I kind of love to start to lead people maybe through whatever creative journey that they're on, whether they're fellow writers or whether they're artists, designers, people trying to do things on their own.
Mm.
I mean, you've had publishers and you've had an agent and things that are kind of part of somewhat of a team, I suppose, but you're still spending a lot of time doing stuff on your own. Are there any kind of bits of advice or things that have helped you within that journey of spending a lot of time just creating things in your own head and putting them out there?
I think it is to talk to people as best you can. I always try, like, I've tried to keep office hours with writing because I think if you're everything expands to the time you give it. And if you think to yourself, oh, well, the day is mine, well, the day isn't actually yours. You're supposed to be writing. So I've tried to keep to kind of between, 9 and 5 every day. I'm doing something, I'm writing, I'm teaching writing, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm actually doing stuff, or I'm ghostwriting, I'm interviewing someone, I'm doing the podcast. I've got something to do with that kind of core of what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's also the horror that you are working mainly on your own for, like you said, for most of the time. So making sure that you do get out of the house, because
Mm-hmm.
if you're stuck in your house, then you have no work-life balance. It looks like you do. You look like you have the best work-life balance, but you actually don't, because they tend to bleed together. So the advice that I would give is make sure that you do get out every now and again. Make sure that, once or twice a week, meet a friend for coffee down the road, or do something, or go for a walk, get a pet, get a dog, go for walks, do things, actually, live a life whilst you're trying to achieve your creative dream.
That's very good advice. And yeah, it's something really simple, but I think something we forget. We kind of get into this creative zone where, you forget to eat lunch and you're doing things and stuff. But then
Yeah.
that's a great place to be, but sometimes spend too much time there and it can kind of catch up on you in that you're in your own head a lot and you're in your own space, and the energy in the room that you're in is always kind of the same and swirling around. So to just kind of refresh the situation and go somewhere or speak to someone else about anything but the thing that you're working on can be really good for both your creativity and your sanity, I think, on this journey.
Yeah, and you need both. I mean, I'm not saying that to be fair, a little bit of insanity can help with creativity anyway.
Yeah, we have to be
It's
a
all
little
a
bit.
sliding scale.
Yeah. That's for sure. That's for sure. Fab. Well, thank you so much, Nicky, or N V Peacock, for coming on to the show. It's been such a great conversation. I think people will get loads of insights out of it, and I think really valuable for everyone. So I'll, of course, put in the show notes everywhere links to everywhere to find you. But is there anywhere people can jump on and stalk appropriately right now?
Well, you can definitely stalk me on the Red Rabbit Hole. So the Red Rabbit Hole podcast is available wherever you'd get a podcast. So Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, Apple, you name it, it's there, lurking, waiting for you. And on the podcast, we talk to other thriller authors talking about the research they do, because that's a huge part of writing that people tend to forget about, is the
Yeah.
rabbit holes of research you'll jump down for books, especially things like thrillers and horrors that they're
Yeah.
pretty dark and they can suck you
Yeah.
in. And again, the problem with research is very much a procrastination, because you can do research and be like, oh, I'm still doing something, and
Yeah.
get sucked down, and 10 weeks later you're still down that rabbit hole and you've not written a word.
Yeah.
So we talked to loads of different thriller and horror writers talking about the cases, like the true crime cases especially, that have inspired their works. So we've covered everything you kind of name it, from
Wow.
the chocolate poisoner of Victorian London all the way through to Jack the Ripper, through to oh God, everyone, through to we just did the Yorkshire Ripper.
Wow.
And the Madeleine McCann case, and anything that you can name, we've decided we just tried to do it. We did a Christmas episode that's going to be airing next week, and we took a Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and tried to fit it to true crime cases. It was hilarious. Because really, it was just my point was, it's a huge, massive gaslighting thing, isn't it? To Scrooge, that this is
It's
what
true.
his future was. So I was like, oh, gaslighting. So
I
yeah,
love that idea.
yeah, and it was, wasn't it? It was just a massive gaslighting that he fell for and changed. But there you go.
It's true, but yeah.
But yeah, so you can find me at the podcast, and you can find me on Amazon all over the world. If you just put in N V Peacock books, I will just pop up.
Amazing. Well, I'll of course put the links down below so everyone can find you. But otherwise, thank you again so much for coming on the show.
Right,
Lovely
thank
to
you,
have you
Ellie.
here. All right. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Maverick Mind. I hope that you've loved it, and if you have, I would appreciate it so much if you would subscribe and write a 5-star review on wherever you're listening to this podcast from. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, I invite you to join me over on Instagram at maverickmindco, or on my website maverickmind.elliefoden.com. And I'll see you in another podcast very, very soon.